take a moment to reflect on just how far this league has come. What a century of hockey at its highest level looks like, and feels like, and sounds like. It's then you'll understand just why the National Hockey League has meant so much to so many. Think of the game then as a link between people and places and time. Think of it, more than anything else, as a connector of generations.
What is undoubtedly true about hockey is that when it appears, it captivates the imagination of the country as a pastime. From 1875 to 1893, hockey goes from something that really doesn't exist as a sport to being the country's #1 passion in virtually every part of the country. French Canadians play it. Aboriginal Canadians play it. Immigrants play it. Poor people play it. Wealthy people play it. In the early days, the club is the basis of the organization. Clubs play exhibitions. Eventually, the exhibitions become some kind of regular competition. That becomes a league. The big transition for hockey is the formation of the NHL. The National Hockey League is the organization that becomes the long-term viable business.
History tells us the NHL is 100 years old. But as a professional game, hockey has been around even longer than that. In Canada, before the NHL, there was the National Hockey Association, a league that, like the rest of the country, was devastated by World War I.
The sport's in desperate trouble. A lot of the best players are fighting, and they've left the game. It's hard for us to imagine how bad World War I really was. The casualty rates were just astronomical.
Alan Scotty Davidson, who was the captain of the Toronto Blue Shirts that won the Stanley Cup in 1914. So imagine, if you will, he's being presented with the Stanley Cup, and then the next spring, you know, he's over in France, killed in a trench raid. The owners at the time are trying to figure out a way how to keep their league going. And one of the things they decide to do is to grant the 228th Battalion, the Northern Fusiliers, a franchise in the NHA. Unthinkable, unheard of, where you have a professional league with a battalion, a military battalion, having its own team.
Subsequently, it was a bit of an absurd ending that they realized that they actually had to ship out to France, and they, you know, literally on the Friday before they were supposed to play a game, they abandoned the league. The Toronto team also collapsed, which was part of the story of the formation of the NHL. The majority of the owners of those hockey teams couldn't get along and didn't like the Toronto owner.
That owner was Eddie Livingstone, a bit of a lone wolf and a thorn in the side to the rest of the owners.
And they essentially called a meeting behind his back, and they met over several days at the Windsor Hotel in Montreal.
They decide to rename the National Hockey Association and give everybody a franchise except Eddie Livingstone.
And the owners formed this new league, the National Hockey League, the NHL, excluding Livingstone.
Soon after that meeting, the National Hockey League was officially formed on November 26, 1917. It began with 4 teams, all in Canada, 2 in Montreal, 1 in Toronto, and 1 in Ottawa.
The first pucks dropped on December 19th, 1917, and things really went off with a bang. The Wanderers beat the Toronto Hockey Club 10-9, and that was really the high point for the Wanderers. After that, they didn't win another game, and their arena burned down.
That first year, the Toronto Arenas came out as champions and played for the already 25-year-old Stanley Cup against the Vancouver Millionaires of the Pacific Coast Hockey Association. Toronto won, but the league still had a long way to go.
By the end of the first year of the NHL, you're down to 3 teams. It is barely surviving. The war ends. Unfortunately, what happens is a bunch of guys come back and they bring the Spanish influenza with them, and you have a plague that kills millions and millions of people in North America. The Spanish flu was a flu that actually attacked the healthiest citizens, so athletes were particularly susceptible.
In the fall of 1918 is when the flu was really at its worst. A player named Hamby Shore, who played for Ottawa and had played for years, died in October of 1918 before the season started.
That season, the Montreal Canadiens won the league. But when they traveled out west to play for the 1919 Stanley Cup against the Seattle Metropolitans of the Pacific Coast Hockey Association, the influenza outbreak was so prevalent, it forced the cancellation of the Cup. And just 4 days after that, the death of Canadiens defenseman Joe Hall. Yet, despite all of its off-ice issues, the league somehow soldiered on. All the more remarkable considering the on-ice product was often nothing much to look at, and at times, even harder to see.
Lighting is terrible. It would be equivalent now to watching hockey with a handful of flashlights. It's that dim. Players in the very early days are wearing almost no equipment.
They were less protected and more apt to be bloodied at the end of a game.
They were all taught to use their sticks. Heavy-duty weapons. They weren't as long as they are today, but they were heavy and did some damage. Guys would get gashes and cuts and lose teeth, but they'd be back out in the ice.
If you go back to the very early professional hockey, the game would look radically different. No forward passing as we now know it.
And it was basically one line that played the entire game, and if somebody was injured or exhausted, well, then they'd put a spare out at that point. So the shifts could have been, I don't know, 20 minutes long.
The goalies up until January of 1918 could not leave their feet to make a save. The NHA had even gone so far as to try to penalize goaltenders for doing this, even invoking a $2 fine. Frank Calder, who was the president of the NHL at the time, said, "I don't really care how goaltenders make saves, they can stand on their heads for all I care." And that has given us that line that we still use today when a goaltender's having an incredible game, we say that he's standing on his head.
Through it all, the early NHL was actually high scoring, with players like Phantom Joe Malone, who had started his career in the National Hockey Association. By 1917, Malone was with the Montreal Canadiens and scored 44 goals in 20 games. 2 years later, he had 7 in a single game, a record that still stands. Gradually, the game began to produce several more recognizable players, like Cy Denneny of the Ottawa Senators and his teammate King Clancy, as well as the league's first superstar, Montreal's Howie Morenz, a 3-time most valuable player. And then there was the diminutive netminder, recognized as the NHL's first great goaltender, the Chicoutimi Cucumber, Georges Vezina.
He was around 16 years old when he finally got on skates and started playing for his local team in Chicoutimi, which is in northern Quebec. The Montreal Canadiens had traveled north to Chicoutimi to play an exhibition game against the local club, and Vezina was backstopping his team, and incredibly, the local boys had somehow bested the Montreal Canadiens.
And everyone to a man is like, sign this guy. And they do. So Vezina, gets pulled from the crowd almost like, Chicoutimi's Got Talent kind of contest.
Vezina went on to play 16 seasons for the Montreal Canadiens, at one point starting 328 consecutive games. He helped the Habs win their first 2 Stanley Cups before he died at the age of just 39. By the early 1920s, the NHL was now made up of 4 teams, all still in Canada. While it couldn't really be called a success, it wasn't a failure either, until the owners recognized that just to the south lay a vast land of wealth and opportunity they simply couldn't pass up.
It was a great market that was untapped at this point, and they had to go into the United States.
Once you come into the States, phenomenal market. This is almost like what it was like for America to make the Louisiana Purchase. I mean, look at what the heck you're getting here.
The Roaring '20s changes everything in the NHL. It's competing with so many different interests at the time, including the silver screen, which is breaking out. To be a competitive entertainment force, one of the things they do is introduce these ice palaces.
When they opened, they were new and modern and huge. Madison Square Garden was a huge rink. The Boston Garden, when it opened, they were bigger than the rinks in Toronto and in Montreal and in Ottawa in particular. Chicago had that organ right from the beginning. It was the Madhouse on Madison right from the start. You could put 16 to 18,000 people in there, and it was a revelation.
It was an event. Going out to the hockey game was not necessarily unlike going to the opera or going to the symphony. Row upon row upon row, the women are in furs and the men are wearing fedoras and they're wearing their suits.
Like any enterprise in that robust time, the NHL was simply looking to increase revenues. In all, there were now 10 teams, 4 in Canada, with 2 in Montreal, 1 in Ottawa, and 1 in Toronto, by now known as the Maple Leafs. In the States, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Boston, and Chicago all had teams, while New York had 2, one of whom, the Rangers, in 1928, became the first team based in America to win the Stanley Cup, although it was under unusual circumstances.
Their goaltender, Laurent Chabot, gets hit by the Montreal Maroons' Nell Stewart, knocks him clean out. He's done. This day and age, they do not have backup goalies per se. There are goalies that are in the audience that are asked to come down and come on in. There was a goalie in the audience that night, and it was Alex Connell from Ottawa. But the Maroons coach, Eddie Girard, said, no, you can't use him. One of your players will have to suit up.
So Lester had to make a decision. Who do I have to play goal? Talked it over with the team, and he said, I'm gonna go in. He was 44 years old.
So he gets a Laurent Chabot sweaty and probably bloody pads and gear on and goes in net. He lets 1 goal in. That's it. Now, unfortunately, the Rangers only score 1 goal too, so it has to go to overtime. But the Rangers win in overtime.
But by the end of the decade, the league's heady days, like most everything else, soon came crashing down. The onset of the Great Depression hit both the States and Canada equally hard.
There were some teams that struggled very badly. A number of them collapsed. The Canadiens were on the brink of collapse, but they did survive.
Montreal, of course, has 2 teams historically, a French team and an English team. The English team is the Maroons. They don't survive. Pittsburgh moves briefly to Philadelphia, doesn't survive. And then, of course, the Ottawa Senators, a team that had gone back to the 1880s. They go to St. Louis briefly, but they ultimately don't survive either. They were struggling even before the Depression hit. They were kind of a classic small market team even then. So, you know, losing 4 of 10-team league is no small thing.
It is really remarkable that the NHL survived the next decade and a half, leading up to and through World War II, when the only constant was instability. Back then, visionaries kept the league in business, like Maple Leafs owner Conn Smythe, who in the midst of the Great Depression somehow managed to build Maple Leaf Gardens in 1931. Meanwhile, his team, who had acquired veteran defenseman King Clancy from Ottawa, along with the kid line of Joe Primo, Harvey Busher Jackson, and Charlie Conacher, won the Stanley Cup the first year in their new building. But for much of the 1930s, the better teams were in the United States, along with many of the best players. When the New York Rangers won in 1933, they did so with Frank Boucher and the Cook brothers, Bun and Bill, all Hall of Famers, while the Boston Bruins had the one player as skilled and feared as any in the league, the incomparable Eddie Shore.
Opponents were scared of him. You know, they gave him enough of a lane so that by the time he reached the blue line of his opponent, he already had a full head of steam. He played with the ferocity of Ty Cobb, with an edge of menace. It was very compelling. You couldn't take your eyes off him when he was playing. But his box office helped the league in the way that Babe Ruth helped establish Major League Baseball in the wake of the Black Sox scandal. For example, he was the first hockey player ever profiled in the New Yorker magazine. Eddie Shore had everything to do with making the sport significant in America.
Shore might have been front-page news in the States, but he was far from an angel on the ice.
They were playing against Toronto in 1933. He gets body checked by Red Horner. Shore is furious, and he looks up, and whether he was in a confused state or whether it didn't matter to him, but he found the first blue sweater he could find and knocked them into tomorrow.
Mistakenly spied Ace Bailey, the most sportsmanlike player on the Leafs. Bailey hit the ice headfirst in an impact that caused a skull fracture.
Bailey gets rushed to the hospital down in Boston, and they don't think he's going to make it. They bring in a priest, they call for his family to come down.
There's a picture of Eddie Shore showing him identified as public enemy #1 that was published in a Boston paper. He was vilified for this. This was beyond the pale.
Eventually, Bailey would recover, but never play hockey again. His injury, however, did lead to a charity event in 1934 to help his family financially, in what's now recognized as the NHL's first All-Star game.
There is a famous photograph of the two of them shaking hands. Shore in his uniform, Bailey in street clothes. That response really saved not only Eddie Shore, but also helped salvage the reputation of the league.
Highs and lows were a hallmark of the early NHL. Teams came and went with regularity. In Detroit, the Red Wings would eventually become one of the league's more successful franchises. But during the formative years, when they were known first as the Cougars and later the Falcons, the team was closer to bankruptcy than championships.
By that time, Jack Adams was reduced to going door to door, up and down Grand River, trying to sell or trade tickets to that night's game to the local grocer, the bakery, and so forth. And to the rescue comes James Norris.
James Norris was a wealthy Canadian grain merchant who had failed in 2 previous attempts to buy into the NHL. When he was finally successful in purchasing the Detroit franchise in 1932, he quickly proved to be an astute businessman with a flair for innovation.
He introduced matinee games to the NHL. They'd always been played at night before. He allowed ticket buyers to buy their tickets in installments. That was a first for the NHL. And then he started beefing up the lineup. In terms of hockey history and Red Wings history, the greatest single thing that James Norris did was introduce the famous winged wheel to the Detroit uniform and changed the name of the team to the Red Wings. Within 3 years, they were playing in the Cup Finals. They lost to Chicago, but a couple years later, they won their first Stanley Cup and repeated the following year.
In time, Norris would go on to become one of the more influential owners in the NHL. So much so that his imprint, like many of the game's early pioneers, is found today on the league's most prestigious awards. The Norris Trophy is handed out to the league's top defenseman, while the Rookie of the Year gets the Frank Calder Trophy.
What a play by Matthews!
Named after the league's first president, who served from 1917 until his death in 1943.
Here's Connor McDavid.
The leading scorer is given the Art Ross Trophy,
And he's in and he scores!
in honor of one of the game's first great innovators. There's also an award given out at the Hockey Hall of Fame, named after Foster Hewitt, the legendary broadcaster with an unforgettable voice and undeniable effect on the league's formative years.
He's in close, he shoots, he scores!
Foster Hewitt created the language of the game. He shoots, he scores, the very fundamental things that everyone needed to describe the game, and made it into a 3-act play that he was a star in.
You can imagine sitting around a transistor radio out on the prairies of Canada listening to Foster Hewitt say,
"Hello, Canada. Hockey fans of the United States and Newfoundland. Well, it would be almost like he was in a wind tunnel, fading in and out.
It was humbling to be presented with an award that has his name on it. When they asked him about a good location for the brand new Maple Leaf Gardens, he determined what the proper distance and the height would be to broadcast a hockey game. And so his famous gondola was not just an accident, it was done with a lot of work on his part. It became the way to be attuned to hockey.
Hello, Canada and hockey fans in the United States. We're at the 8-minute mark. There's no score. There's a shot. Goal! And right in on the net.
The other thing that you have to remember about Foster is that he really brought great entertainment to the war effort as well.
And an extra big hello to Canadian servicemen overseas.
Broadcasts of hockey games were shipped over to Europe, so it was much bigger than just in houses across Canada. It was across the ocean as well.
Up to the blue line, gaining speed to center.
In the years just prior to World War II, hockey might have been Canada's game, played mostly by Canadians, but the Stanley Cup champions were still teams from the United States. The Chicago Blackhawks somehow won in 1938 after winning just 14 regular season games, and the New York Rangers took their third Stanley Cup in 1940. But it was the Boston Bruins with the famed Kraut line of Bobby Bauer, Woody Dumart, and Milt Schmidt that was recognized as the NHL's best team.
Bobby was the brains of the line, and Woody and myself listened to Bobby, and we got along quite well.
And they grew up in the same hometown in Ontario, Kitchener, Ontario. They all got the same salary. They lived in the same boarding house in Brookline, Mass. At one point, they led the league in scoring 1, 2, and 3. It's remarkable. They were a real-life three musketeers in that it was truly one for all for one.
The Kraut line led the Bruins to 2 Stanley Cups, the first in 1939 and the second in 1941. A dynasty seemed in order. World War II would get in the way, although it did provide for one of the more remarkable moments in league history.
The last game that we played before going into the service, after the game was over, all of a sudden the Montreal Canadiens hoisted Bobby, Woody, and myself on their shoulders. That was really something, because they were bitter enemies until then.
A few years later, at the height of World War II, the NHL's first 25 years came to an end. The founding era was over, and the days of the original 6 about to begin. In October of 1942, in Canada and in the United States, much of the public attention was focused on the war overseas. In the midst of the turmoil, the National Hockey League began its 26th season, ushering in a period of what turned out to be a stretch of remarkable stability. For the next 25 years, the league was built on the back of, and consisted of, just 6 teams.
You had 2 teams in Canada. You had the Canadiens and you had the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then you had the Rangers and the Blackhawks and the Bruins and the Red Wings in the United States. You had 120 guys playing in the National Hockey League at that time.
During the NHL's golden age, there was a real sense of familiarity, a meaningful and emotional bond between team and community. And and the players they grew accustomed to rooting for. But even for the great ones, with so few jobs during the original Six era, among the players, there was an undeniable tension.
These guys played with injuries. Elmer Locke once had his foot slashed by an opponent's skate, and it slashed through the leather boot. And he's sitting on the bench, and a teammate looks down and sees the blood pooling at his feet. And he says, "Elmer, what's wrong with your foot?" And Elmer looks down and he says, "Oh, it's nothing serious." Well, it was 2 severed veins. And Elmer's playing hockey on this. It was always the thought that if you were taken out for a game and the guy who replaced you played well, it would take something pretty miraculous for you to get back into the lineup.
It was rough and tumble hockey. You had to be rugged to play in the NHL in the old days. The rivalries were intense. You played each team 14 times.
There was no friends on the ice. They were all enemies. That meant cutting you to win. I'd cut you to win.
They couldn't literally breathe each other's air. And John Ferguson once was sitting in a restaurant in Toronto up the road from Maple Leaf Gardens with a teammate. He'd ordered a steak, and Eddie Shack walked to the back of the restaurant. Fergie threw a bunch of money on the table, and he said to his teammate, "Let's go." And the teammate said, "Well, the food hasn't arrived." He said, "If you think I'm going to sit and eat in the same restaurant as Eddie Shack, you're dreaming."
In just about every way, both on and off the ice, the NHL of the 1940s and 50s was decidedly different than it is today. One of the more striking was the way teams traveled between cities, on trains, where avoiding the enemy was nearly impossible.
You wouldn't go in to eat when they went in, or they wouldn't go in to eat when you went in, because we were enemies.
I've heard stories from some of the old-timers who would talk about stumbling into the dining car when they thought it was their time and the other team was still in there, and dishes being thrown and punches being thrown and insults being exchanged.
These teams would be gone for 2 weeks, and you can't help but become close to your teammates. They would go to the smoking car together. They would play a lot of card games.
Those lengthy trips, like Montreal to Chicago, were overnight, and that meant a distinct player protocol for sleeping. Rookies on top, vets on the bottom. For some, it was difficult. For others, just part of the charm.
I never slept well on the trains. Because of my length, I just never got comfortable in the berths. They were way too short for me. Going to Chicago, I can almost remember every clickety-click.
Tickety-tick, tickety-tick, clickety-click, clickety-click. It was just a way of life. On the long trips out to the East Coast, we used to love to go to the club car. And they had crispy tablecloths and napkins and sit there and have a New York steak, medium rare, and watch the world go by. That's what I miss most, were the road trips. The camaraderie of the guys, all for one, one for all, trying to make the playoffs and win that old chalice, the Stanley Cup.
Much of the NHL's heart and soul could be found during the original Six era, including 3 of the NHL's greatest dynasties and many of its more memorable and recognizable stars. Most notably, Gordie Howe, who had such a tremendous impact on the professional game, they called him Mr. Hockey.
Gordie's always been a force of nature. He was just one strong kid. Ab Howe, his father, would show off Gordie's strength by saying, "Gordie, go lift up those 5 bags of 95-pound cement." And Gordie could actually lift all 5 bags, dog-eared like that, and swing them and throw them onto the back of a truck.
Gordie Howe was the best hockey player I ever saw. He was the only ambidextrous superstar. Imagine, he could shoot from the left, he could shoot from the right. Who else does things like that?
Howe gets over the line. He's cutting in. He gets set. A backhand. He scores. Gordie Howe.
Gordie could do everything. He had this great edge to him. He could be as physical and as hard-hitting and as nasty as you wanted, but he had such a great nose for the net.
He was not only very skilled, but he was as tough as anybody's ever been in the NHL.
Gordie Howe played his first NHL game in October of 1946. And for the rest of the original six era, and even beyond, he was the face of the league. Beginning in 1950 as the centerpiece of the famed production line, with Sid Abel and Ted Lindsay, Howe led the NHL in scoring 4 consecutive years, twice in both goals and assists. He was the offensive engine of a Red Wings team that also featured 2 other all-time greats, goaltender Terry Sawchuk
But once again, Terry Sawchuk is too good.
and defenseman Red Kelly.
When I got the puck, I was offensive.
To Red Kelly, who drives in a screen shot.
You have to have goal scorers. You have to have checkers. You have to have some diggers who will dig that puck out of the corner. It's not one player, it's a team.
Sawchuk is mobbed by his jubilant teammates.
The Red Wings won 4 Stanley Cups in the first half of the decade, including back-to-back in 1954 and 1955. At the time, a period of unprecedented dominance for the NHL's marquee team. For the National Hockey League, the back half of the 1950s saw the emergence of another legendary dynasty, led by another legendary star. The first player in the league to score 50 goals in one season, Maurice Rocket Richard.
Goalies have said that his eyes looked like lights flashing on a pinball machine, and he literally skated to the net carrying a defenseman on his back.
And there's Rocket goal number 3.
As much of a hero as he was as a hockey player, there very much was this political undercurrent in the province of Quebec as you turned from the 1940s into the 1950s.
The French Canadians, right, in Quebec, even though they are the French-speaking province, often felt oppressed.
Although Montreal is majority French, people didn't feel they were in majority. St. Catherine Street at the time, all the signs were in English, all the business was in English.
Rocket Richard was more than a hockey player for citizens of Quebec. Over the years, he became an icon, a symbol.
Richard's fame was such that nearly 2 decades after he played, he still was the centerpiece of Rock Carrier's iconic piece of Canadian literature, the children's book, The Hockey Sweater, which was also made into an animated film.
We all wore the same costume as Maurice Richard did.
My mom said, rock your sweater, there's holes there, people will think that we are poor. So I will order a new sweater. So we received the hockey sweater, and it was not the sweater of the Montreal Canadiens, it was the sweater of the Toronto Maple Leafs. The enemy.
I can't wear that. Maurice Richard would never wear it.
Fortunately for the book's little hero, 1,000 moths appear, eat his sweater, and end his misery. And while the book brilliantly captured the cultural tensions between English and French-speaking Canada, there was an incident with Maurice Richard in 1955 that was far more violent. It all began when Rocket engaged in an altercation with the Boston Bruins and knocked a linesman unconscious. NHL President Clarence Campbell suspended Richard for the rest of the season and the Stanley Cup playoffs. And when Campbell showed up for a game at the Forum, Montreal fans, upset with the treatment of their star player, spilled their anger as well as some blood.
They didn't suspend a hockey player, they suspended God.
and a guy comes up on the premise of shaking hands with Mr. Campbell, in fact punches him. All of a sudden, Campbell's bombarded with tomatoes and other debris, and then a smoke bomb goes off.
A tear gas bomb was thrown, and fans went on a rampage.
We get into our dressing room, and all of a sudden our doctor comes running in. He said they've thrown tear gas, and he's kind of wiping his eyes. We undo our skates, and we don't know what's going to happen. The next thing we know, they've rioted, they've set fire to newsstands on St. Catharines.
And fans destroyed thousands of dollars worth of property and just pretty much made a mess of the city of Montreal.
It was hockey inspired, but it became much more than that. And that's another reflection of the way that hockey, almost a literal expression of the way that hockey spills out of the rink into life.
Richard was so frustrated with the suspension, he even contemplated retirement. He did reconsider and eventually returned, vowing to lead to glory what was fast becoming the NHL's most talented team.
It was just a joy to watch those guys skate and move that puck. And that Doug Harvey would just lay that puck right on their stick, wherever it was. There, up the center. He was magnificent.
And then you move up front and you have a guy like Jean Beliveau. If Maurice Richard was the furnace in the belly of the Montreal Canadiens, I would say that Jean Beliveau is the conscience.
For 5 consecutive seasons, ending in 1960, Les Canadiens were the only team to hoist the Stanley Cup, a feat no other NHL team had ever accomplished. And they did it with pretty much the same lineup each year. Beliveau, Harvey, Dickie Moore, Boom Boom Jaffrion, Jacques Plante the goalie, Maurice Richard and his younger brother Henri were among the 12 players who played on all 5 Cup-winning teams. For most of the original 6 era, NHL hockey looked pretty much the same. Same 6 teams, playing in the same 6 arenas. Madison Square Garden in New York, the Forum in Montreal, Detroit's Olympia, the Boston Garden, Chicago Stadium, and Maple Leaf Gardens. But over those same 25 years, there were several notable innovations that had a major impact on the game. The Red Line was introduced in 1943, which helped speed up play. 3 years later, Maple Leaf Gardens installed plexiglass, which improved the fan experience. And 8 years after that, in 1954, the Zamboni was first used, and poor ice conditions around the league would soon improve dramatically. Player equipment changed quite a bit too. In 1947, Emile the Cat Francis made goaltending a bit easier by using a new, larger catching glove. Although that upgrade did little to make the NHL's most dangerous position any safer.
I'm just in awe of the punishment that those guys took, from pucks and crashing players and skates flying at them. The equipment they were wearing didn't provide a lot of protection, especially the fact that they weren't wearing masks. It was a mark of honor, really, how many stitches you'd had through your career.
I had 45 stitches here with a skate, and that was the time they didn't have these white tips behind the skate. I knew that I was going to get some scars sooner or later. I knew I was going to lose my teeth, and I did lose them all.
Glenn Hall liked to shave before a game, and everybody said, why would you shave? He said, well, when they're putting stitches in, it's a whole lot easier and cleaner when I'm clean shaven.
While most hockey players in the 1950s considered a stitched-up face to be a badge of honor, there was a sense of cruel and unusual punishment when it came to the men in the net. And in 1959, Jacques Plante finally did something about it.
Andy Bathgate was mad at Plante, and he came in and flipped the puck right up into his face, no mask. Plante had been experimenting with a mask. He went off to get repaired, and his nose was a bloody mess.
Plante got stitched up, and he said, I'm only going back into the net if I can wear my mask.
He took off on a winning streak after that, and that cemented his ability to wear the mask in NHL games.
Things do move very quickly after that, but there's a lot of resistance. I mean, guys in the NHL aren't wearing masks 10 years after that still.
Even in 1974, Andy Brown of the Pittsburgh Penguins was still not wearing a mask. And so by this point in the league, you already had players like Bobby Hull, who had perfected the slap shot. He was shooting his slap shot at 118 miles per hour. So you're taking your life in your own hands at the other end of a Bobby Hull slap shot.
When I started something, I wanted to perfect it. I got so I could slap that puck pretty good.
His teammate Stan Mikita had a stick that had been broken partway on the blade, and he just took some shots in practice and realized it did all kinds of things when he slapped it. It dipsy-doodled and up and down, and well, all of a sudden, the light bulb went over their heads, and they're soaking it in hot water and then putting it under door frames so they can curve the stick. It changed the game substantially.
Then, after revolutionizing the game, the NHL came to us. Okay, we want you to get 3 sticks ready, and we're going to come and check them to see that they're not too much hooked. Well, they might just as well have pounded sand, because as soon as their back was turned, I got the torch out, and I was hooking mud the way I wanted it.
It was, however, hardly surprising that some other, more important changes were slow to come to the league. It wasn't until 1958 that the NHL saw its first black player, Willie O'Ree of the Boston Bruins. And when it came to contracts, Original Six owners had the players just where they wanted them.
The owners of each of the 6 teams were paying their players a pittance for all intents and purposes. Hey, if you don't like it, the American Hockey League, the Western Hockey League are there. We'll send you there again, and you'll be so far gone, the hockey news won't be able to find you.
Every year was a battle for your salary. They would go in and sit down, and the contract would be shoved across to them to look at, and it would be the very same one they had the year before, and the same one as the year before that.
Eventually, a few high-profile players decided something had to be done. In 1957, Ted Lindsay of the Detroit Red Wings was one of them, risking his career in an attempt to start an NHL Players Association.
We weren't looking to run the game, but I do the same thing today because I believed in what I was doing. I wasn't doing it to agitate owners. I was doing it for the players.
Although some progress was made, it would be another 10 years before the NHL would have an official Players Association. While Lindsay himself, despite being a 9-time All-Star and captain of the Detroit Red Wings, was unceremoniously traded to the Chicago Blackhawks. He left in 1960, a year before the Hawks, with Bobby Hull, Stan Mikita, and goalie Glenn Hall won the 1961 Stanley Cup. It was, in fact, the only time in the Original Six era that a team other than the Montreal Canadiens, Detroit Red Wings, or Toronto Maple Leafs would win the Cup. The Leafs bookended the era's 25 years, winning the Cup 6 times from 1942 to 1951, the NHL's first real dynasty. But after that, it would be another decade before Toronto would challenge for the Cup again. This time, led by young stars Dave Keon and Frank Mahovlich, as well as veterans Red Kelly and the ageless wonder in goal, Johnny Bower, who had spent most of his first 14 professional seasons in the minors before finally finding his form in Toronto.
Bower made a sensational save, covering up on the shot.
My childhood dream, I wanted to play in the National Hockey League. I wanted to have my name engraved on a Stanley Cup.
The Leaf players come pouring over the boards to congratulate one another.
And my dream came finally true.
Bower first saw his name engraved in 1962, and then again in 1963 and 64. Although that year is best remembered for another Leafs act of remarkable courage. Trailing the Red Wings 3-2, defenseman Bob Baun had to leave the ice on a stretcher after blocking a shot late in Game 6.
They're lifting Baun up there on that stretcher.
Well, his pain threshold was very high.
He played with injuries that normal people wouldn't have played.
Baun somehow returned to score the overtime goal.
He comes back to Bob Baun, he shoots, he scores! Bob Baun shot.
Then helped the Leafs win Game 7.
And the Toronto Maple Leafs win the Stanley Cup.
As it turned out, on a broken ankle. After Toronto's run in the mid-60s, the Cup twice went back to Montreal. And by 1967, most of Toronto's veteran team was thought to be too far down the line to challenge the mighty Canadiens for another Stanley Cup.
No one that year expects the Toronto Maple Leafs to win, including in Toronto. Great players, but for the most part, they are on the very back end of their career.
Everybody sort of thought this was the over-the-hill gang.
Over-the-hill gang, but over-the-hill gang knew how to win.
Despite an average age of more than 40, Toronto's goaltending tandem of Johnny Bower and Terry Sawchuk led the Leafs to a surprising victory.
It's all over. The Toronto Maple Leafs have won the Stanley Cup.
That's what it's all about. You grow up as a kid, you want to play in the National Hockey League. Then you want to win the Stanley Cup. After you've won one, then you want to win another one. Then you want to win another one. That's what I loved. That's what I loved the most.
That cup, Toronto's 13th, would be the last of the original 6 era. Just 6 months later, the NHL would double in size, and nothing about the league would ever look the same again. When the NHL wrapped up its first 50 years in 1967, it was far and away the smallest and most provincial of North America's 4 professional leagues. With just 6 teams, it could even have been classified as quaint. But in the league's 51st year, a seismic shift would reshape the landscape.
Clarence Campbell, the National Hockey League president, along with the board of directors of the National Hockey League, realized that in order to increase their revenues to where it should be, they needed to double the size of the league.
This year, for the first time, the league will be composed of 12 teams.
So in the 1967-68 season, they introduced 6 new teams. We've got Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, we've got St. Louis, we've got Minnesota, we've got Oakland, and we've got Los Angeles. Rather than it being a league that only went as far west as Chicago, all of a sudden is extending into the wonderful California market.
We have orange of Philadelphia, hockey in orange, and green in Minnesota, and baby blue in Pittsburgh, a color you normally see on religious statuary and baby blankets. And all this was coming to the sport. It was making it more colorful. But it was inevitable, because if hockey didn't grow, it would have shriveled and maybe died.
Twice the teams meant double the players, giving many career minor leaguers a chance to finally play in the NHL. It also extended the careers of several notable veterans, like 36-year-old goaltender Glenn Hall, who became the backbone of the St. Louis Blues, a wise decision given the new league structure.
The East Division was the original 6 teams. The West Division was the 6 new expansion teams.
We know that the expansion teams can't compete for a period of years compared to the old established franchises, so they give their own division where they can make the playoffs.
The first 2 expansion-era Cup finals saw the Canadiens sweep the St. Louis Blues. Although thanks to Hall, the first was closer than expected, with each game decided by 1 goal. But the Habs' victory in 1969 would mark the end of an 8-year run of either Toronto or Montreal winning the Cup. The new decade would bring a new champion, with a bright new star from Parry Sound, Ontario, who from the age of 14 had seemed destined to become the new face of the league.
In the 1960s, the Bruins fell on hard times and dropped to the bottom of the league. The fans were getting a little restless. And the word was out now that we had this phenom. And when he got here, magical things started to happen to hockey in the next 10 years.
Orr breaks for the net. Scores! Orr. Shot. Score! Score! Bobby Orr! Orr, a backhander. Score!
First time I saw Bobby Orr, and I sat there like this for 2.5 hours because I had never seen anything like it.
What a save by Bobby Orr! He can play goal too.
Talk about a guy who would electrify a rink when he gathered the puck in his own end and did his thing like nobody else ever did it. Teammates sometimes were giving it one of these when Bobby did his thing, and maybe even a few opponents. He left opponents in his exhaust fumes.
You always like to see somebody that's that good of a player do what they do and go, pretty cool.
Intercepted by Orr, he breaks. Over the line, drills one, scores!
Bobby Orr revolutionized the game. He changed the game forever.
You know, I'm not trying to be modest, but I never thought about changing the game. I was playing a game that I loved. I was realizing a dream. The only thing they said to me is be careful. You know, when you go up the ice, try to pick your spots. But it didn't take long for the players to understand how I played.
Closing with Orr, Orr in, shoots and scores as he was spilled in the corner.
I didn't think about scoring X number of goals. My goal was to be on a Stanley Cup team.
For Bobby and the Bruins, that would happen in 1970, ending Boston's 29-year Stanley Cup drought, capped by Orr himself. A moment now frozen in time.
Bobby Orr, behind the net, the Sanderson, Orr! Bobby Orr!
Bobby Orr was Peter Pan, and on May 10th, 1970, when he scores the cup-winning goal on Mother's Day in a steamy Boston garden, he flew. He flew through the air. Peter Pan flies through the air. It was one of those moments that captured hockey.
Each time I see Glenn Hall, Glenn says, "Is that the only goal he ever scored?"
In the early 1970s, as Orr was revolutionizing and reshaping the role of an NHL defenseman, his Bruins were busy setting dozens of scoring records, many of those by center Phil Esposito, who led the NHL in goals 6 straight seasons, scoring an unheard of 76 in the 1970-71 season. A year later, Espo had 66, and the Bruins another Stanley Cup, their second and last of the Bobby Orr era. By 1973, the NHL had grown to 16 teams. But for the next several years, the league, now admittedly a bit rougher and tougher, would come to be defined by just one, and their self-described intimidating style of play. Although the Philadelphia Flyers weren't always the Broad Street bullies.
There was the big bad Bruins in St. Louis under Bowman and stuff. They were beating the crap out of us physically.
We've got a fight.
We just got bigger and stronger and tougher, and we started returning the favors, started beating up other teams. I loved it. Give our team a personality, and in a physical sport, if you're the most physical, that's a big advantage.
Dave the Hammer Schultz, 400-plus penalty minutes through the course of the season. Bob Kelly, Moose DuPont, these were tough boys. When the opposing teams came to town, they all of a sudden got the Philadelphia flu. They didn't really want to play in Philadelphia too badly because they knew that there was going to be a war one way or another. The other owners were horrified at the Philadelphia Flyers. Wait a minute, what happened to our beautiful game?
We got kind of tattooed with the Broad Street bully thing, but if you really looked at the team, we had finesse and good hockey players. You don't win through bullying. You win through team play and a system we played in that Fred Sherrill set up for us. And you still have to score goals, you still have to make defensive plays. The Flyers had all of that through that time.
In 1974, after just 7 years in the league, the physical Flyers became the first expansion team to win the Stanley Cup. They outmuscled, and perhaps more rewardingly, outskated the Boston Bruins in 6 games, led by the spectacular play of goaltender Bernie Perron.
Get in the playoffs, you feel the excitement, and the crowd elevates you to a different level that makes you perform at a different level. It's a beautiful thing.
The next year, 1975, Perron was again the hero, with the Flyers prevailing over the Buffalo Sabres. It was the first time in the history of the league that the Stanley Cup final was played without an original 6 team. But to the everlasting thanks of much of the old guard, that would soon change.
In 1976, the Flyers were the barbarians at the gate, and it needed the Canadiens to rebalance the game.
We felt that we had a lot of pressure on our shoulders throughout the league to kind of change the way that people thought that the game should be played.
Canadiens were tough too, and they weren't angels, but the Canadiens came down more on the good side. Larry Robinson hitting Gary Dornhofer and actually denting the boards. He hit him so hard. Really announced that the Canadiens were not going to take anything.
If you want a rodeo, we'll give you a rodeo. If you want a skating game, we'll give you a skating game. They could play the Philadelphia Flyers straight up and beat them at their game if they had to, but they could also beat them on the scoreboard. That was such a team.
The Canadiens not only won that cup, but 3 more as well, with what might have been the most impressive collection of talent ever assembled on the ice.
They were an absolutely spectacular team. Larry Robinson, Serge Savard, and Guy Lapointe, and the great forwards Guy Lafleur and Steve Shutt and Jacques Lemaire.
He had a great goaltender in Ken Dryden. You had speed from Cournoyer, who was known as the Road Runner. He had the best checker in the game in Bob Gainey.
We had 9 members of the Hall of Fame on the same team.
The 1976-77 Canadiens, they lost 8 games all year. It was the best team that hockey's ever seen.
In that one remarkable season, Montreal lost just a single home game, and its 132 total points remain the most in NHL history. The Canadiens' offense was nearly unstoppable. Steve Shutt had 60 goals, at the time the most ever by a left wing, while the defense, led by Larry Robinson and goaltender Ken Dryden, was nearly impenetrable. Fittingly, the Habs capped their 2nd consecutive cup with a 4-game sweep of the Bruins, perhaps the only acceptable result for the demanding mastermind behind their bench.
Scotty Bowman was brilliant. He was coaching analytically before anyone had heard of the term analytics, and no one ever ran a bench with more acuity.
He was ahead of just about everybody in the game, but more than anything, he had to be master psychologist because he had a group of the most talented players on the planet who most nights could beat any team in the league. So he had to find a way to keep them on task, and he did. And so for that very reason, there'd be mumbling and complaining about him, but they played for him.
364 days of the year, we couldn't stand him, and on the 365th day, we got our Stanley Cup rings.
Anything less than the Stanley Cup was a bad year.
During the 1970s run, Mayor Jean Drapeau, and he didn't mean this in any kind of a flippant way, issued a press release saying the Canadian Stanley Cup parade will follow the usual route. You looked at the schedule, and you knew roughly what day you were going to have to cut class, what lamp pole you were going to climb at the corner of Peel and St. Catherine Street to watch the Canadian Stanley Cup parade go by.
And when that parade did go by, as it did 4 consecutive years in the late 1970s, there was one player everyone wanted to see, the visual image of the Flying Frenchman, Guy Lafleur.
He was born to be a hockey player. Guy played just from the seat of his pants. He wasn't an X's and O's type player.
For a game at 8 o'clock, he would be in the dressing room fully dressed at 3.
Nobody wants to practice against him. He was too good, he was too fast, and he had the stamina. He was always ready to go and skate and skate and skate. On the bench, we had the best seat of them all. Just see him going by the bench and flying in his hair, going back and then shooting the puck.
His hair was long enough and he moved fast enough that his hair would stream out behind it. And when he would start up, it would kind of flip up, you know, and then it would stream out. It was how people could almost connect to the speed.
Every time I was on the ice, I was the happiest guy in the world. So, especially the form, wearing the Montreal Canadiens uniform was a dream come true, and I was very, very proud of that.
Lafleur scored 560 NHL goals and 58 more in the playoffs, eventually leading the Habs to their 22nd Stanley Cup, with Montreal becoming the first of 3 straight dynasties that would go on to redefine the game. When the New York Islanders won the 1980 Stanley Cup, it marked both the beginning of the expansion era's second dynasty and the culmination of a master plan that came together through the draft, piece by Hall of Fame piece. The core of the Islanders featured defenseman Dennis Potvin, center Brian Trottier, left wing Clark Gillies, goaltender Billy Smith, and one of the greatest goal scorers in league history, Mike Bossy.
When I sat down with him and his agent, Michael turned to me and he said, "What is a 50-goal scorer worth to you?" And I said, "Are you telling me you're going to score 50? And he says,
It'll be Dean Talafis against Bryce Letty.
We drafted you to score goals. Go out and score goals. At the same time, I knew I was coming onto a team that had tons of promise. So in that way, I was very enthusiastic.
Bossy, of course, did become a 50-goal scorer. 9 times, in fact, in his first 9 seasons. And although it did take the Isles a few years longer than they expected, that promise did eventually translate into championships. In the early 1980s, the Islanders played the game any way their opponents wanted. They were as tough as they were talented. And in their 4 Stanley Cup finals, they only lost a total of 3 games.
The New York Islanders win 4 straight games for their 4th straight Stanley Cup.
There's 16 guys on that team that won 4 Stanley Cups in a row. I mean, that's amazing. There's no way a team like that will ever exist today.
I can tell you one record that will never be broken, and that's 19 straight playoff series wins. Fabulous, fabulous dynasty.
A 20th straight series win would have given the Islanders their 5th straight cup. It was, however, not to be. There was a new dynasty on the horizon, led by the most prolific scorer the game would ever see.
When Bobby Orr came in, he was a can't miss. When Connor McDavid came in, he was a can't miss. Crosby came in, he was a can't miss. When I came in, it was, well, maybe, because people didn't know if I was big enough or strong enough to play in the National Hockey League.
Everybody thought he'd be a bloodstain on the boards. Everything looked wrong. He was hunched over a little too much. His helmet was flimsy, so he looked like he was vulnerable.
It didn't take long for Wayne Gretzky to disprove those doubters. In his rookie season, at the age of just 19, he led the NHL in scoring, and then kept on going, smashing records and changing the game. A true hockey savant.
I attacked avenues that other guys hadn't in the past. A, playing behind the net. If a team tried to flush you out, then you came out the other way. If they stopped and just stayed there, and you waited and looked for the open man. I was doing something that they weren't sure how to defend because nobody had really ever done it before. With that came my work ethic, and it just sort of all added up to being Wayne Gretzky.
He had an amazing desire, his anticipation, his spatial awareness, right? That's his magic, his spatial awareness. They always say 5 sticks are better than 1, and Wayne knew that.
Wayne played chess, and he was playing 10, 20 moves ahead of everybody. His anticipation and his knowledge of everybody else on the ice and their space and their timing and where they were and how fast they're moving can only be described as pure genius.
My dad really believed that you could teach that at a young age, and I used to watch Hockey Night Canada with a big pad of paper with the blue line, red line nets, and I would just follow the puck, and I wouldn't even look down. I'd just follow the puck on the paper with a pen and watch where the puck was the whole time. And I was like a sponge. I took all that in.
In the 1981-82 season, Gretzky scored an NHL record 92 goals. But the great one was far from a one-man band. In the late 80s, his Edmonton Oilers won 4 Stanley Cups in 5 years, with arguably the most skilled and explosive team to ever play in the NHL.
Mark Messier could do everything. He was a consummate hockey player. He could score, he could check. When he needed to be mean, he was mean. In many ways, in the lineage of a guy like Gordie Howe, Messier became so feared.
Messier up the center, offensive right corner dump. Curry with a one-timer.
They had a clearly defined style. They used to tell you, we're going to outscore you. You might get 5, we're going to get 7.
Gretzky to Curry, score! Here's Coffey on a rush, right in, shoot, scores! 24-year-old Paul Coffey.
Let them go, let them play, let them have fun. You know, that was the whole philosophy of that team.
Wayne Gretzky played 10 years in Edmonton and led the NHL in scoring in 8 of those.
Cutting inside of Hoffmeyer, score!
And 4 times topped 200 points. The only NHL player to ever reach that mark. But following the 1987-88 season, all of that magic in Edmonton would come to a shocking end.
The Edmonton Oilers have agreed to trade Wayne Gretzky to Los Angeles.
Basically, it was a death in our family. We lost the king of the game.
Promised Mess I wouldn't do this.
Just complete devastation for myself personally, I know for all my other teammates, and of course the city of Edmonton.
How do you let somebody like that go out of your life that you've spent so much time with? I mean, that whole city went into mourning.
What did it look like when he put that Kings jersey on? I'm sure for many Oiler fans it put a tear in their eye, and you might have thought that hockey would never be the same.
In truth, with the great one in LA, hockey never was the same.
The lasting impression that I will have is being at his first game in Los Angeles and seeing all the movie stars there and seeing people who had never been to hockey games there, applauding Wayne and how he transcended the game.
I'm not sure there'd be any teams in the Sun Belt without Wayne. I don't think there'd be a Ducks. I don't think there'd be a Panthers or a Lightning. That became a huge factor in how the NHL grew.
Wayne, however, was the same great scorer in LA. And by the age of 29, on the verge of passing his idol Gordie Howe as the NHL's all-time leading scorer, in of all places, Edmonton.
It was only fitting that it should happen in Edmonton because I'd played so many nights there and people have been so good to me.
He's done it! Wayne Gretzky, the great one, has become the greatest of them all!
I remember saying to my dad, it just doesn't seem like I should be knocking off Gordie Howe. Because I started watching him when I was 5 years old on TV, and there was just something about him that was so magnetic. And so Gordie became my guy. I had to wear number 9. I even, when I was getting a haircut, asked the barber if he could give me a Gordie Howe haircut. That's how much I idolized him. And then I got so lucky in my life, I got to meet him when I was 10. He was the most humble man I've ever met. Over the years, when I was chasing down some of his records, we became very good friends, and that made it very special.
When he finally finished his career with the New York Rangers, inappropriately 1999, Wayne Gretzky was the holder of just about every NHL scoring record imaginable. And in most cases, so far ahead of anyone else, it's likely they would stand forever. No matter which new great stars would come along in the next 25 years, and even beyond.
Offensive right corner up. Curry with a one-timer. Delia's going right in on goal. He scores. The Robitaille got tripped and he scores. Oh, what a goal!
There was a period of time between the mid-'80s and the mid-'90s where every year there were at least 15 50-goal scorers, and there were 15 guys who would get 100 points.
I played in the era with the most talented players ever to play the game and the biggest stars ever to play the game. Gretz, Mario, Messier, Jagr, Coffey, Steve Yzerman, Peter Forsberg, Mike Modano, Brad Hall.
Oh, got a shot. Score!
One of the greatest snipers ever, not because he was my son, but he could score goals in so many different ways.
Gives it in front to Hall, shoot, he scores!
Hull and Oates.
Oates for Hall, he scores!
Adam Oates put that biscuit on Brett's tape so he could let her go. And he did. 86 times, if he could imagine, and 72 times, and a bunch of 50s.
Just about every NHL record for points and goals was set during that 10-year span from the mid-1980s to the mid-1990s that bridged the NHL's last two 25-year eras. And many of those came off the stick of a hockey prodigy from Montreal, who would go on to lead his Pittsburgh Penguins to 2 Stanley Cups at the start of the 90s.
I was only 18 years old when I came to Pittsburgh, didn't know what to expect, didn't speak any English at the time. I just wanted to play in the NHL and having a chance to one day hopefully lift the Stanley Cup at center ice.
In fact, it didn't take Mario Lemieux very long to leave his mark on the NHL.
Lemieux, his first shot on goal, and he scores!
After scoring on his first NHL shift, Lemieux went on to win the Rookie of the Year award. And by the age of 22, he was the league's most valuable player and leading scorer with 199 points. One shy of becoming the only NHL player other than Wayne Gretzky to reach 200 in a single season.
Mario's so special because he did the things that guys like Guy Lafleur and Marcel Dion could do, but he was 6'5", and he had a reach that nobody else ever had.
Lemieux sails and he scores!
Yeah, he was big and he was strong and his hands were silky smooth, but he was fast. His strides were so long. So where you thought, well, maybe he's lumbering a bit, he wasn't lumbering at all.
That's a Mario Lemieux goal!
Super Mario might have been spectacular, but he wasn't indestructible. Before he was even 25, injuries curtailed his career.
I remember having my first back surgery before the 91 season. After that, I got a back infection where I was in bed for 3 months, and I really didn't know if I was going to be able to walk again. Thankfully, I got better, came back, played 25 games at the end of the year.
He had somebody else tying his skates so that he could, wouldn't have to bend over and straighten back up to play.
Half the time, he couldn't even bend over when he walked in the room.
but he played that night, and you'd say, how the heck does he do that, you know?
Ironically, it was that injury to Lemieux that opened the door for another future Hall of Fame great to excel with the Penguins.
Messier and Jagr is having a night of nights here tonight.
Jags was a tremendous talent, but he was 18 years old, homesick. The culture was so different for him coming from Czechoslovakia. By the end of that first season, he was one of our best players, scoring huge impact goals. And of course, he goes on, becomes one of the greats of the game.
Lemieux somehow returned for the playoffs that year and led the Penguins to the first Stanley Cup in franchise history.
Pittsburgh, 1991 Stanley Cup champs.
The Pens followed that up with another the next year, and Lemieux, despite missing 5 playoff games with a broken hand, led all scorers and was again named the playoff MVP. By the mid-90s, at the age of 28, Mario Lemieux was solidly in the prime of his career when he was forced to face the biggest fight of his life.
It was a shock for sure to be told that you have cancer.
It was pretty kind of strange. I don't know if I can describe the words. Like, see young man when he heard from the doctors, and he said he had to stop the car because he was crying.
I talked to our doctors and people that went through it in the past. I felt more comfortable about the outcome, and it was just a matter of going through the radiation for 6 weeks, and I couldn't wait to get back on the ice.
And then went on an unbelievable rampage. He averaged so many points per game in that last stretch after he came back from Hodgkin's that if he had averaged that many points over the course of an entire season, it would have been a 260-point season.
Simply amazing.
Lemieux would retire in 2006, and while there would be no more cups in his career as a player, he did hoist 3 more as an owner, cementing his legacy as one of the pillars of the league. It was midway through the NHL's 76th season on February 1st, 1993, that Gary Bettman was installed as the NHL's first commissioner.
I viewed the opportunity to be at the NHL as exciting, as challenging. My vision was to take the great foundation we had as a game and grow it.
And while his influence would be wide-ranging and play out dramatically over the next 25 years, it was just after his arrival in 1994 that the New York Rangers, an original 6 team, ended a long championship drought. The Rangers had come close several times in the past and appeared to be in the midst of coming up short again, falling behind 3-2 in the conference final against the New Jersey Devils. But along came Mark Messier.
We had lost momentum. We had to figure out a way to get it back. And for me personally, I just wanted the team to know that I really believed that we could go in and win Game 6.
This was headlines on all the sports sections in New York. Mark Messier said, "We will win Game 6.
If anyone knew what it took to win a cup, it was Messier. He already had 5 with the Edmonton Oilers.
The man that proclaimed, "We will win Game 6, has just tied it. Mark Messier gets his second goal. The Rangers lead 3-2. Do you believe it? He said we will win Game 6. He has just picked up the hat trick.
In the Stanley Cup final against the Vancouver Canucks,
Let's go Rangers!
the Rangers won an equally dramatic Game 7.
As exciting as it was and as much as we wanted to celebrate, nobody took a breath until that final whistle went. The rest speaks for itself.
The New York Rangers are the Stanley Cup champions!
3-2
Like the Rangers, the Detroit Red Wings also wandered through the NHL wilderness for decades, entering the mid-90s, having last won a cup in 1955.
Steve Yzerman is the first turning point because you could build it all around this franchise seminal player. But they still needed other pieces. It took Russian pieces, it took Swedish pieces.
It was in October of 1995 that 5 of the Wings' Russian pieces stepped onto the ice together for the first time and promptly revolutionized the game.
It's an amazing feeling when you step on the ice. There's Kozlov, there's Fedorov, there's Konstantinov, there's Fetisov, and we start to play a different style of hockey.
The 5 Soviets are out there now playing as a unit.
They passed the puck amongst themselves 15, 20 times. It was almost like keep away out there.
This is Larionov as they weave and circle. There's Konstantinov, one touch. Fedorov fires and scores!
I was always fearful that somebody could figure out what they were doing because we couldn't ourselves.
There weren't many teams that could figure out those Wings, but the Colorado Avalanche was certainly one of them. From 1996 to 2002, the Avs and the Wings did plenty of fighting, but plenty of winning, too, taking 5 of 7 Stanley Cups.
Colorado wins the Stanley Cup!
Colorado won first in 1996, and the Wings the next year. Bringing Detroit its first Stanley Cup in more than 4 decades.
So for the fans, the city, the state of Michigan, to get back to where Gordie and Alex and Ted and where a lot of our fan base expecting it to be was very exciting for us all.
Finally, the cup is returned to Hockey Town. The curse of 42 years finally ends.
The celebration, however, was cut short when a tragic accident ended the career of Vladimir Konstantinov, one of the stars of the Wings Cup win.
The team kept his locker intact with his gear and had a small rock or a stone where it said "Believe." That gave us motivation to come out and have another strong year.
We knew we have 2 wounded soldiers not with us that season, so we knew we got to put an extra effort for them.
The next season, the Wings would take the cup again, a victory best remembered for its heartwarming ending.
We weren't aware really until the 3rd period that Vladdy was there.
Standing ovation for Konstantinov.
Then they brought him down onto the ice after the game. To be there and to be a part of it with us was very emotional.
The Wings would go on to win 2 more cups.
The Detroit Red Wings have won the Stanley Cup.
The first in 2002, Scotty Bowman's 9th and last as a coach. And once more in 2008, with Nicklas Lidstrom of Sweden, the first European to captain a Stanley Cup champion. But while the Wings had once again become a winning franchise, the Chicago Blackhawks, another of the original 6, were still trying to find their way back to the top of the league.
We had dipped into irrelevancy, and it was rough for a while.
Only the late man Hamlet, the shot.
Talk about a renaissance. It's staggering.
Then the Taves breaking in over the Avalanche line, down the slide, he shoots, he scores! What a play by Jonathan Taves!
The revitalization of the Blackhawks began in 2007 with the arrival of Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane.
And here comes Kane. He scores!
We're young kids kind of coming into the city. We always heard that if you guys win, the fans will come back and start watching you. So that's exactly what happened.
It was amazing to see hockey kind of reawaken in this town, as 2 of the best players in the history of the game were just starting out. And there was this awesome team built around them that was young and exciting and fun.
kids grew up in a hurry, and in 2010, ended the Blackhawks' nearly 50-year run without a Stanley Cup.
I was just trying to not get too excited because I just felt like it was almost too good to be true.
For the first time since 1961, the Chicago Blackhawks have won the Stanley Cup.
But the Hawks didn't stop with just one cup. 3 years later, they won their second in one of the most miraculous finishes in the 100-year history of the NHL, scoring 2 goals in 17 seconds at the end of Game 6 to beat the Boston Bruins.
For the second time in 4 seasons, the Chicago Blackhawks have won the Stanley Cup.
And 2 years after that, they won it again. Their 3rd cup in just 6 seasons. In the last 25 of its first 100 years, the NHL spotlight fell on several generational stars. Some who put the puck in the net, and some who kept it out. Patrick Roy won 4 Stanley Cups with 2 teams. The first with Montreal in 1986, and the last with Colorado in 2001. While the incomparable Martin Brodeur won 3 with the New Jersey Devils, before retiring in 2015 as the NHL's all-time winningest goaltender.
And Martin Brodeur is the winningest goaltender in the NHL.
But as the result of several rules changes in 2005, the game opened up and scoring increased, once again shining the spotlight on explosive offensive talent.
Crisscrossing, sidestepping a hit, what a move! Ovechkin's in! His chance!
Russian-born Alexander Ovechkin, a dangerous combination of power and speed, began his career in 2005, the same year as Sidney Crosby, another of the era's seminal offensive stars, creating a rivalry that would intensify as each player continued to excel.
Welcome to the Crosby Show, Sidney Crosby, absolutely off the charts.
Like a lot of the all-time greats who came before him, it didn't take long for Sidney Crosby to find his place in the league. He topped 100 points in his first year, and by the age of 19, led the NHL in scoring. And after coming close to winning the Cup in 2008, in 2009, he became the youngest captain ever of a Stanley Cup champion.
Even though I was only in the league for, I think, 3 or 4 years, I think you still understand how tough it is, and you don't necessarily get opportunities like that all the time. So the fact that we got there back-to-back years, you really want to make the most of that opportunity.
Just a year after winning his first Cup, Sid the Kid topped 50 goals.
Sidney Crosby with a big 5-0.
But his brilliance isn't found in just numbers alone. For Crosby, it's all about winning cups, which he did twice more, the last to close out the NHL's 100th year. Throughout its 100-year history, with all its legendary players and great teams, one thing about the National Hockey League has always been the same. It was when it started, and remains to this day, intent on the overall growth of the game.
We had teams in newer markets, but the philosophy was we've got the greatest athletes in the world on and off the ice. We could do so much more and be so much bigger if we gave more people an opportunity to actually touch the game.
And touch the Stanley Cup, which in the NHL's last 25 years happened to 13 different franchises, including more than a few of the Sun Belt cities.
We've had the Stanley Cup won by a Dallas, a Tampa, and Anaheim. That tells you that hockey will work wherever we are, no matter what the temperature is outside. We've been to the Stanley Cup final in South Florida, in Nashville.
The number one thing that comes out of expansion into non-traditional hockey markets, more players.
Austin Matthews will tell you, if the Coyotes had not been in Phoenix, he would not have played hockey. This would not have happened. So we would not have seen this player.
Over the years, especially in the last 25, finding that talent, wherever it may be, from North America to Europe and beyond, has helped the league become the global game it is today.
Less than half our players are Canadian-born. 55% is split between European-born and U.S.-born. The international talent pool, the U.S. talent pool.
Do you believe it?
The Canadian talent pool, which continues to be deep and strong, certainly makes for a better product for our fans.
The NHL has done more than just embrace players from throughout the world.
Game 2 of the 2017 NHL China Games.
Since 1997, it's traveled overseas itself, playing games around the globe. And while the recent NHL has grown exponentially, as it neared the end of its first 100 years, the league also found a unique way to embrace the sport's roots.
It's a rollicking scene in Buffalo, New York, as the NHL has taken it outside, and more than 73,000 are here to witness it.
The game on his stick right here. Score! Penguins win!
It conjures up imagery and imaginations. And they're thinking about their childhoods when they first learned to skate, and so many of them did on frozen ponds.
The Winter Classic and other outdoor games have crossed over from a sporting event to a cultural phenomenon and brought the NHL to iconic venues like Fenway Park, Soldier Field, and even Dodger Stadium.
We will present a game of hockey, a game like no other.
And in the last few decades, technological advances like video replay have enhanced the game, taking the sport itself and even how it's consumed into its next century. 100 years ago, the very thought that hockey could even exist as a professional sport wasn't much more than that. Just a thought. What the league has become since then is a remarkable testament to perseverance, enterprise, and innovation. And of course, unmatched and unforgettable talent.
Boy, did they ever play hard. It is a collection of sweat and adrenaline. And what's it for? You'll have that adjective in front of your name the rest of your life. Stanley Cup champion, first name, last name.
Lifting the Stanley Cup. We all dream about it. It's in our blood if you're a hockey player. The people you think of, like your grandparents, your mom and dad, the coaches you had, it's not just you getting your name on the cup, it's everybody that's part of your life that got you there.
Wayne Gretzky is still and will always be a face of hockey. Bobby Orr is and will always be a face of hockey. But the fact that we have so many young players that can follow in their footsteps, understand what they accomplished in bringing the game to the point that it is, it's not only a compelling story, there are limitless opportunities. I and so many others are happy to celebrate the first 100 years, but we're even more excited about beginning the second 100 years.